Up to tax year 2025 and earlier, you could deduct 100% of gambling losses on Schedule A if you itemize. So if you still need to file your 2025 return or amend a prior year return, the 100% rule still applies. However, for tax year 2026 and forward, under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, only 90% of your gambling losses are deductible, even if you itemize. The 90% is still capped at the amount of your winnings. So a break-even gambler would be taxed on the 10% of their winnings regardless. And that 10% does not carry forward and cannot offset other income. You will pay tax on it even if you itemize. The winnings amount is the overall cap. So first you calculate 90% of your losses, then you cap the result at the amount of your winnings. Let's go over some real examples. Example 1. A gambler has $10,000 in both winnings and losses in 2026. He can only deduct 90%, which is $9,000, of his losses if he itemizes on Schedule A. $1,000 will still be taxable even though he broke even. Because of the new 2026 tax rules, be prepared to set aside money to cover gambling income taxes. Now let's look at example 2. It's the same scenario but for tax year 2025. In that case, the taxpayer can deduct the entire $10,000 on Schedule A. Now let's take a look at the third example. A gambler in 2026 won $10,000 but had $20,000 in losses. First, 90% of $20,000 is $18,000. But that has to be capped at the winning amount of $10,000. So the gambler can deduct $10,000 on Schedule A. They cannot carry forward the remaining $8,000 in deduction as losses, nor can they use them to offset any other income. Now, how do you enter the new 2026 90% rule into tax software? I am recording this in the summer of 2026, so the software hasn't yet been updated for the new tax law. The screens and entry process may change, but as long as you understand how the deduction is calculated, you will be able to enter it correctly. Depending on the software, you may enter your gambling losses with your W-2G tax form or in the itemized deduction section. In TaxSlayer, I will go to my W-2G form and calculate how much I can enter for gambling losses if this were a 2026 return. In our example, Luca won $10,000 and had $15,000 in losses. 90% of $15,000 is $13,500. Since $13,500 exceeds his $10,000 in winnings, his deduction is capped at $10,000, which is still the full winnings amount, so no taxable gambling income. Now let's say his losses were exactly $10,000, same as his winnings. In that case, for 2026, he could only deduct 90%, which is $9,000. That amount would need to be entered into the tax software, or the software may eventually be updated to do the calculation automatically when you enter the actual expenses. You should always verify the deduction amount to make sure you are not claiming more than allowed and potentially receiving an IRS notice. When I preview the 1040 now, I can see the itemized deduction has been reduced by the disallowed $1,000 in losses. If you compare the 1040 tax return, assuming the same tax brackets, a gambler who itemizes would receive a $185 refund in 2025, but would owe $35 in 2026. The difference is that the new 90% rule reduces the gambling loss deduction, and therefore it increases the total tax owed. So how does the 2026 90% gambling loss deduction rule impact you? Let's compare 4 1040 tax returns. One for 2025 with no gambling winnings. Second, with gambling winnings using the standard deduction. Third, with gambling winnings and itemized gambling losses for 2025. And fourth, with gambling winnings and itemized gambling losses under the new 2026 rules. Adding $10,000 in gambling winnings increased Luca's total tax by $2,200 when using the standard deduction. Itemizing in 2025 would fully offset that in our example, bringing him back to the exact same total tax as if he never gambled. But under the 2026 90% rule, even with itemizing, his taxable income would slightly increase because only 90% of his losses would be deductible. Thanks so much for watching.